All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to be hosting our all-member Elder Justice Task Force meeting, as well as an encore presentation of our ALA presentation this year in Chicago in 2020. Oh, I'm sorry, in June. The name of that presentation is Elders Deserve Social Justice Too, Challenging Ageism Towards Older Adults Through Libraries, Communities, and ALA. And on that panel was Alan Kleiman, who is not able to be here today, Julianne Novetsky, who is not able to be here today, and Joseph and I. First, we're going to go ahead and go through a little bit about, we have a lot of new people. So we're going to go through a little bit about what Elder Justice Task Force is, how we started, what our goals are, and then we're going to roll into the presentation. All right, Joseph, next slide. So first, who are we? Who is Elder Justice Task Force? At the conference, we introduced ourselves, but here we're just going to talk a little bit about what Elder Justice Task Force is. And I'll say that Elder Justice Task Force was started by Joseph and I, and we were formed in 2024 with about 10 members. We've grown to about 25 members, and that number is plus or minus because, it kind of ebbs and flows who's available to volunteer and who's not. We were formed under SRRT, which stands for the Social Responsibilities Roundtable. We'll talk a little bit more about that in one of the next slides. Ready to go on? So our mission is to partner with adults age 65 and older, libraries and communities to identify, understand, and address the needs of this growing population and growing and diverse population. So we see our mission as being aligned with the social responsibilities roundtable belief that libraries and librarians must recognize and help address social problems and inequities to carry out their mandate to work for the common good and bolster democracy. So when Joseph and I were creating this task force, this idea, um, we knew that elder justice belonged as a social responsibility. We often see things under SRRT, like the Feminism Task Force, homeless. Ooh, it was homeless and hungry. Hung, I'm not sure. But there's different responsibilities, and elder justice was a gap, and we knew that we could fill that gap. We currently operationalize our mission through four goals, which is one, to challenge ALA, two, to create community, three, to showcase resources, and four, to facilitate training. Now, our first goal, Challenge ALA, is to challenge ALA and library profession to be more inclusive of older adults through increased anti-ageist representation of this population in the programs, services, and education offered. This committee, so our goals are organized, our committees are organized by our goals. This committee is led by Julianne Novetsky, who was with us at our presentation at ALA. She couldn't be here today, but her updates is that from their audit, they are moving towards a framework. And you're going to be, people who are new are like, what are you talking about, Christina? What audit? Well, as part of their work, they were tasked with producing an audit of the ALA website. I'm going to talk about little bit about that later. Don't you worry. But I also want to talk about one other goal that they have, or one other project that they have, and that's creating a proposal idea for ALA 2027. That comes out of this audit to framework idea, and that is how library researchers and practitioners can work together to create helpful resources for communities. So let's go to the next slide because I think she talks a little bit about the audit in the next slide. No, she doesn't. We'll talk a little bit about the audit in the presentation. So we'll move on to create community. Zoe is with us, I believe, so she can give us an update from her committee.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm the leader of the Create Community Committee. So two of our big responsibilities are to do a mini grant every year, an annual grant. So for those who don't know or are unfamiliar with it, each year three people, either current MLIS students or early career professionals, are eligible for to submit a short essay about how they're going to use the funds to support elder justice in their work. And so these are the winners of this year's 2026 mini grant. The prize is $100, so it is very small, but we're this is only the second year we've done it, so I've been really pleasantly surprised by like the number of applications we get, and it's really exciting. And I think I have a second slide. Yes. So now that we are 2 years into the mini grant process, we've kind of got that down. So this upcoming year, I would really like to focus on getting social media up. So I think for the rest of this calendar year, the committee will be focusing on creating a backlog of content so that in January we can launch an Instagram account and be able to have a pretty regular posting schedule. The hope is that this will really help to sort of create an online or virtual community across the country. And then also in January, we think it would be a really great idea to have a newsletter. We're still working through whether it should be an EJTF specific newsletter or if it would make sense to bundle within the existing SRRT newsletter. But those are the updates that I have right now.
Thanks. So
Great. Is Alexis here by any chance?
I don't think I saw
Yeah,
it.
I didn't think so. All right, great. So, from a lot of our leaders have been with us from the very beginning when we put a presentation at ALA in 2024 about forming this entity. And so, one of the other goals that we've been focusing on is the facilitate training committee. There's a lot of gaps around training for library services to older adults, which I'll talk about more. But Alexis Cantu at the Chicago Public Library and Alan Kleiman, who was the director of the Edison, New Jersey Public Library, they've been our leads in this area. And we've been working with them and working with the broader library community on topics that we think will be relevant to folks. One of those is that there is a lot of emphasis on the needs of people with dementia and their caregivers that are going on in libraries. Every ALA conference that I've been at recently in the last several years, there's always a packed room at the dementia-focused events. And I think that speaks to the importance of the work that all of us are doing around serving older adults. And so, and especially those with dementia. So that's one area. Of course, there's many other focuses that we'll be doing, but we're going to be doing a, webinar hopefully in November looking at what sort of resources are available for libraries trying to better serve people with dementia, including a grant that's available for libraries through the American Library Association. So we'll talk more about that. We're also in the very beginning of looking at a series of webinars that would be led by Dr. Edna Craven, who is on, I know, on the call here somewhere, and focused on the caregiving resolution that she recently helped get passed at the ALA Council. So we're excited about that. And also, we've been looking ahead to think about us maybe doing a pre-conference event ahead of ALA in New Orleans next year or an online Elder Academy, because there are so many folks in the library community who have served older adults for so long and have a lot to share. And we would love to create a space to help folks showcase that expertise. So yeah, that's just what we're working on. If you have any topics for a webinar, feel free to get in touch with us. I think there's a link on our website, but you also can email us about any topics you think that we should be covering in future webinars.
Hello, my name is Manon Merriweather, and I run the Showcase Resources committee right now. And if anyone is excited about this and wants to get more involved, I'm looking for a co-chair currently. Right now, we're looking at getting our next committee meeting scheduled, so it'll either be in late August or early September. And if you're on that committee or you're interested in attending, please fill out the when to meet, and I just put it in the chat. I need that by tomorrow so that we can get it on everyone's calendars at least 2 weeks before the meeting. And we'll be talking in that meeting about next steps for this next couple months and where we want to go. But one of the ideas that we had before I went on leave for the last few months was to work on compiling more resource lists. So we've got a lot of expertise in our committee about different resources we would recommend to other librarians related to elder justice, or to patrons. So we're hoping to put together some resources and blurbs about them so that people know where to find things.
All right. And let's go back to the last slide. So this slide was one that we had at our presentation. It was just kind of an idea of some of the resources that we wanted to share out with people. And these are some of the resources that you might find on the website going forward. Take a notice of our website. It's ala.org/srrt/EJTF. All right. So at the conference, this is how our agenda went. We did a little bit of presentation. We talked about 3 parts, which is our 3 goals or our 3 learning objectives for the talk. And then we had Alan talk about a little bit of history for ALA, for the record, at 150, and the role of elder justice within ALA. And we had a little bit of discussion, so we'll have some discussion at the end. So the learning objectives for this talk were to explain how ageism shapes services, workplaces, and professional organizations, to learn the diversity of older adults that can be engaged and represented in library work through community partnerships, and develop activities for how to enact anti-ageist practice with patrons, colleagues, and ALA. All right, next slide. So as I said, the title of our presentation was Elders Deserve Just Social Justice Too, Challenging Ageism Towards Older Adults Through Libraries, Communities, and ALA. All right. So the first section that we'll talk about is modeling anti-ageism to patrons, and that will be led by Joseph.
Hello, long time no see, everybody. So this is the part of the presentation that I delivered at ALA, and starting with what are we talking about when we talk about ageism? And really, ageism boils down to being treated differently, usually negatively because of your age. In research with older adults, I often hear stories of how people have tried to help them. They oftentimes they say it's like, oh, they see the white hair, and people jump into action, which some participants seem to really appreciate and some didn't. So that's sort of a personal experience there. But oftentimes when we think of ageism, we are thinking about it being treated, someone being treated negatively because of their age, someone being stigmatized, treated differently, or looked down upon because of being older, also discriminated against because of age. We see this oftentimes in the job market and in people's workplaces. There are studies that show women as young as 35 are discriminated when it comes to new job opportunities because of aging or being old, becoming older. And in a field where we have, it's very much a majority women-led field, there is a real need to emphasize that. Also, thinking about abuse. Prior to me working as a researcher and getting my PhD and becoming a professor of library science, I worked a lot with at a local office on aging, where I got to know all the different sort of federal programs that exist for older adults. But I also was there to lead the first elder abuse response program in East Tennessee, and what I found in doing that work is how so much of elder abuse really does start from a place of ageism. And, when we were coming across perpetrators in that community, we would hear people say, well, this money was going to be mine. So, and they're lived longer than I expected. Therefore, I want it now sort of thing. So I think it is important. A lot of research has shown that also a connection between ageism and elder abuse. But it's something I certainly witnessed firsthand in responding to that work, which is why it's really important to address ageism for these and other reasons. So thinking more about why it's a problem. So the millennial in me, when I hear the phrase the golden rule, I think of the scene from Aladdin, but you might have heard the golden rule discussed as being more about treating others as you would like to be treated. And we in the library world are really entrusted with the public well-being and doing our best to serve them and their needs. So this is something really important for our field. We've also seen in the last several years a growing emphasis on the needs for social justice in library and information science. And so this certainly fits into that. But it's also occurring against this larger backdrop of an aging society. People 18 years and older are outnumbered now by those 65 years and older in the United States and in many countries around the world. And that was a historic first in 2018. Currently, we are seeing multiple generations of older adults, the baby boomers, as well as the silent generation, and some even the last few folks from the greatest generation before that. So we're seeing in our libraries a lot of different generations of older adults who have shared needs, but also unique needs based on their sort of generational experiences. So, for all these reasons, it's really important for us as a field to be thinking about the needs of older adults and how can we better serve them and how can we create more infrastructure for serving librarians also who serve older adults. So here are just some ideas of what library professionals can do. You can model anti-ageism, or other words, a pro-aging approach. And one way that might do this is by beginning to identify and mitigate any biases that you have. Everyone has biases, and oftentimes these are not we don't necessarily think about us implementing these, but it does happen, and it's important for us to recognize these things and to do what we can to mitigate it. But we also can do things like celebrate aging through our library. May is Older Americans Month, as we'll talk about more, and that's a great opportunity. Growing older really is a privilege. We're very lucky to be living at a time where people have more and more opportunities to grow older, and that's something that we should celebrate and not chastise, which you often see so often about getting older. And also just continuing to learn and thinking about what that looks like. So here is just some of going back to that mitigating biases point of view. Here are some sort of resources that you might look into. Project Implicit is very famous for its age attitudes quiz. They have a lot of quizzes on different biases, including age. So if you're not familiar with them, I definitely encourage you to check out that resource. There's also many other tests. If you just Google ageism test, you're going to see a lot of different examples that might be of interest to you and folks in your library. So some of the things that these tests show are there's comparative imagery responses where you're looking at different photos of folks from different generations and ask questions about them, which might help um, show biases that you didn't realize that you had. It also talks about how age defines a person for us, very similar to that last point, I think, and just how um, we might be judging folks without even getting to know them at all, just based on uh, uh, characteristics of aging as we see it. And some of these things are implicit, or explicit rather, in ageism, but there's also a lot of implicit behind the scenes. Things are happening that we don't even realize are ageist. So we need to consider that. So at the end, we're going to have more time for discussion. We sort of broke it out at the ALA conference, but we're doing it a little bit differently for this encore. But something to think about is what could you do in your position to demonstrate anti-ageism or pro-aging? And so some of the examples might be written in visual messages. Age Without Limits has an age positive image library, which might be one helpful resource if you need images. Programming and materials, as I said before, May is Older Americans Month. June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. There's also awareness day about ageism. So there's a lot of opportunities throughout the year to bring attention to older adults. And even in other, like for Black History Month, when we're thinking about all of the programming and collections that we spotlight, we also can think about the examples there of older folks in the African American or Black community. A lot of people don't know that Martin Luther King Jr. credited his grandmother with really encouraging his activism and the work that he did. And so there's a lot of different partners. If you're not familiar with your local Office on Aging or maybe the Area Agency on Aging, that's a federally funded institution that receives money to serve older adults. They're a great partner. And also the Diverse Elders Coalition is a great site for learning more about just the many different older groups that exist out there. And so, kind of give you a chance to sort of think about aging from a variety of different cultural perspectives. And also just continuing learning and applying. One of the projects I'm leading right now, funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, is thinking about, since there is such a lack of training as it relates right now to older adults, serving older adults in libraries and in library education programs, this project is really working with older adults to identify the sort of services they want from libraries, the skills and values they want from the librarians that they interact with. So right now, my team has interviewed more than 50 older adults across the U.S. and select communities, and this will become a foundation for a free training series. That will be available to students, but also folks who are working with older adults currently in their library. So here was a bookmark that you may have seen if you were at ALA or know someone that was there that we gave out to sort of talk up the work that we're doing. But here are just some things that you can improve. You can think about what are your own biases. Doing those Project Implicit tests are really helpful in that way. Challenging ageism through library programming and other activities, and continuing your education and continuing the education that we're all doing for ourselves. We're all learning every day on this topic and taking part in research and practice. And so, one of the things that we're doing as part of this IMLS study is trying to hear from librarians in the field. What have been your experiences of working with older adults? What are maybe some of the gaps that you saw in either your library education or maybe your onboarding and orientation into the library profession, if you have an MSLIS degree or not? Either way, that would be really valuable to hear from you, and it would be part of this training series that we're hoping to eventually launch. So this image here, it will be available also afterwards with the slides when we send those out. But I really encourage you to consider participating. It'll take only about 20 minutes. And if there are other folks in your libraries who've had insights or experiences of working with older adults, we would love to hear from them and your broader networks as well. Thank you.
All right. Now, thank you, Joseph. I led the section on modeling anti-ageism to colleagues, exploring how libraries can support older staff and how that benefits library workers of all ages. All right. We'll go to the next slide. Maybe. There we go. All right. So first we started with a definition. What is age discrimination in the workplace? And Joseph also provided a definition as well. But here, specifically thinking about the workplace, it includes preferential treatment toward younger employees in terms of job selection, promotion, personal and professional development, forced redundancies, and performance reviews. But it also includes expression of ageist attitudes in the workplace, derisive language, and social isolation. But what we really wanted to take away, you to take away from this slide, is that actual discrimination is no different than perceived discrimination. So ageism is ageism is ageism. All right, next slide. We went to the research, and that's because that's what we do. We looked at the research. What does it have to say about ageism in the library as a workplace? And really little was known. We didn't find much. We found a few articles on intergenerational conflict within the library. Joseph has offered this critical gerontology framework. And then we saw one article on health and medical library workers. So there was just a little bit, but there really wasn't any large group of research focused on public libraries in general. And so that we found pretty interesting and a little bit concerning. All right, next slide. So then we thought, what does this look in practice, right? If the research isn't going to tell us, let's have a discussion together and think about what does ageism look like in the library workplace. We boiled it down to in our words, in our actions, and in our assumptions. Very similar to what Joseph was saying before, right? This nice package of three things that we can focus on when we think about fighting ageism or amplifying pro-ageism or pro-ageism, pro-aging in the workplace. We don't want pro-ageism. All right, next slide. So what we wanted to do in the conference was to ask our audience, how do assumptions show up in our libraries? And what we thought of as to give a little bit of thinking points was hiring, training, meetings, technology, that can be a big one, supervision, scheduling, committee assignments, patron services, and leadership opportunities. But what we asked our audience to do on the next slide was to think about how we can make change. So what we wanted our audience to do, and we can do this at the end, was to think about how we can make change within our libraries, thinking about those hiring, technology, supervision, redundancies. Um, how can we make change within our own library at the level that you are at, right? Like if you're a director, you have different capabilities than maybe a library staff has to make change, but there's always way to make change. Small, large, doesn't matter. All right, I think we have another piece of this slide. We suggested to reflect, don't speak for others, use a with and for approach, and words matter because self-ageism is real. How many times have you thought, oh, I've had a senior moment? Or, oh, I'm too old to learn this new technology. Oh, I'm not on TikTok. I'm not young enough for that. So thinking about what the words we say to ourselves also reflects the biases we have, but we wouldn't say that to someone else, but we would say it to ourselves. So it's there. We just have to think about it a little bit more. All right. Now, at the conference, Julianne Novetsky, who is the co-chair of Challenge ALA Committee, presented on modeling anti-ageism within ALA, providing data-informed strategies that all ALA members can do according to their role within the organization to make it increasingly aging friendly. And I'm going to go through her part, not as well as she did, but I will try my best. All right. So at the crux, the main goal of Challenge ALA for years 1 and 2 was the Elder Justice Task Force audit. And the goals were to examine how older adults are represented across ALA, to identify potential ageist assumptions, omissions, and barriers, to establish a baseline for future improvement, and to align ALA's commitment to equity and inclusion with an aging society. And we do see that, again, going back to Dr. Craven's resolution that passed recently through ALA. We see that commitment to older adults, aging, and caregiving there. But what we wanted to do was to take a little bit deeper look to see how it is actually being viewed in life. If you were someone coming to the ALA website for the first time, if you were an older adult, what would you experience? How is this being discussed within ALA? All right, next slide. So to get at this, we asked a few questions. Where are older adults represented? How are older adults portrayed? Who's missing from the conversation? And what assumptions are embedded in our language, policies, and programming? And that one was really important because these assumptions that are embedded are sometimes hard to recognize as a creator, but as the receiver, you can feel it, right? Like if we're saying certain things, like what did I say earlier? pro-ageism. Little things can have a big a ripple effect. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So this group created an audit and they took keyword searches. Some of their keywords included aging, older adult, senior, elder, and ageism. And they searched across ALA websites, not just the main page, but also the other sites within the ALA web home. And they looked at publications, policies, committees, and resources. They logged and categorized their findings using a shared rubric and spreadsheet. So they noted categories like how older adults were being represented, the visibility, the accessibility, and the quality of the content. And again, Julianne could speak more to this if she were here. And then once they had that spreadsheet, that rubric, they analyzed patterns, strengths, gaps, outdated materials, and opportunities for more age inclusive practice. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah. All right. And so this is what they came up with as they're reviewing for themes. They found that older adults were often discussed as service recipients rather than contributors, leaders, or experts. Images of older adults were limited and frequently relied on stereotypes. Aging related content was dispersed across ALA rather than clearly visible and coordinated. And older adult issues receive less attention than many other diversity, equity, inclusion topics. All right, next slide. So here were their recommendations. Based on their results, they recommended to include aging as a diversity and inclusion issue. And that step we're taking with elder justice under SRRT. Use age positive language and imagery. And this speaks back to what Joseph was talking about, the Age Without Limits, who has an age positive image library. So I'll just amplify that. Increase visibility of older adult focused resources and committees. Create more opportunities for older adults to serve as leaders, presenters, mentors, and advisors. And that speaks back to the with and for, working with older adults with them and for them, and to consider the impact of decisions on people across the lifespan. All right. The key lessons that they took away is that representation matters. We want to see, if we don't see you, we don't know that you're there. We need to show people that older adults are there in places of leadership, making change. Language matters. How you talk about older adults matters. We even experienced this. I'm going to go off on an aside. When we formed the Elder Justice Task Force, there was a lot of discussion about what we would be named. And we spent a lot of time, not only amongst ourselves, thinking about what we were going to call our group, but also SRRT had offered a lot of discussion about what it meant to be an elder and did people want to be identified as elders. Image matters, again, coming back to that pro age positive image library. Elders are not a monolith. And so that means that elders are not just one group of people. They all have different experiences in life, just like everyone else. We often group people as older adults if they're 65 or older, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that uh, at 65 you magically change and become assimilated to one group. Nothing about us without us, again, goes to speak to the with and for movement. And then creating a senior advisory committee. Again, I think that Julianne could speak to that a little bit better than I can. So we'll move to the next slide. All right, and I'll throw it over to Joseph.
Okay, so Alan Kleiman is the Edison, New Jersey Public Library Director, but also just a longtime uh, leader in the area of library services to older adults. This is something that he's been working on for more than 40 years, and we've learned a lot from his expertise and experience, so we appreciate him. He couldn't make it today. He's traveling, but I'll just speak to some of what he had shared at the conference. And so, as we all know, I think the American Library Association is celebrating 150 years this year, which is very exciting. And It's given us a lot of an opportunity to sort of pause and reflect on where the association has been, where it is now, and where it might be, especially in relation to the needs of older adults or elders. So some of the things that Alan really wanted to emphasize is the Library Services to an Aging Population Committee from 1957, which is, to my knowledge, the first effort within the association to emphasize and focus on the needs of older adults specifically. This is something that's been going on almost 70 years now, and so we'll talk about some of the aging entities within the organization as we go along, but that's something to consider, really important. He talked a lot about the library's responsibility to those who are aging and the advocacy aspect. There have been several White House conferences on aging that the American Library Association has been part of in the past. And there's not been a conference now in many years. There's a hope that there might again someday be that because we know that the changes or the needs of older adults, like any population, change over time. There's also the guidelines that are available through the Reference and User the Reference and User Association, RUSA. And those guidelines have been around now for many decades and are revamped every few years to ensure they remain accurate as far as how the best way of serving older adults in libraries. He also talked about some of the other entities that have been involved in, such as, the White House conference, as I mentioned, the NCILS, which was the federal library entity prior to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And there's also been different policies over the years that we have found as we've done the audit, and Julianne's really led that for us, finding things like the keys to engage older adults, which is a longstanding resource. And our hope is that we will eventually be able to have a sort of archive of all these past guidelines for folks to be able to reflect on as desired. So some of the things that are going on now, there are currently three entities within the American Library Association that are focused on the needs of older adults. This is the Reference User Services Association group. As I mentioned before, they're the ones that put out the sort of instructions on how to serve older adults in libraries. There's also the ODLOS office, which is the Diversity Literacy Outreach Services in the ALA, and they have a interest group for libraries serving persons with dementia or Alzheimer's. And of course, the CERT Elder Justice Task Force, which we are the leaders of, and the John Hartman Foundation Aging Together report. I don't know if maybe some of you had seen this recently, but the John Hartman Foundation is one of the few foundations that really emphasizes the needs of older adults. That's their major focus, really the only population that they emphasize. And they recently did a report with staff of the American Library Association called Aging Together, which you can find very easily through Google. And it kind of gave a some insights into the current services and programming around older adults in public libraries and other libraries. So definitely worth perusing if you've not had the chance yet. So that's something that just came out within the last few months. So we're excited to see ALA emphasizing that work. Looking to the future, some of the things that Alan had talked about is an older adults roundtable. As I mentioned, there are three entities within ALA, all of which have some overlap, but also differences. And maybe at some point, we'll be able to come together as a roundtable. Which for anyone who's not familiar is just sort of one of the main organizational entities within the American Library Association. Right now, there's some restructuring and things going on, which would prevent a new roundtable from getting started, but I think they say that should change within the next few years, by which time we all might be ready. There's also a hope to be involved in legislation. The OOA is something I mentioned earlier about how the federal guidelines on serving older adults, the Older Americans Act, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as I mentioned. There's not a lot of emphasis currently on older adults, particularly in the guidelines of IMLS, but we're hoping that could be changed. Also, things like promoting Older Americans Month is something that ALA, we hope to encourage ALA to do more of, and also thinking about how we might work with some of the major partnerships that we've talked about today. And the never-ending challenge of keeping up-to-date resources. That's something that we're hoping to do with that archive of these different guidelines that have existed over the years, because it's hard. It's really hard to keep things up to date. And know we in the library world are always kind of running in 10 different directions. So we kind of thinking about how can we make that easiest for all of us. So here are just some of the ideas that Alan had of what you could do to sort of um, make changes around ageism at the level of the association. And one of the things would be utilizing the guidelines as a checklist for services, seeing if your library has any of these needs that those guidelines point out. Are you using a lot of the guidelines already and maybe you just don't know it? That's important to recognize. Partnering with the different local, county, and state area agencies on aging. As I mentioned before, the Older Americans Act is the federal funding that comes from the federal government down to the states, the regions, and the local communities. And they have a mandate to meet the information needs of older adults. So they're a great partner in that work. Ensuring your library's collection contains resources for the growing older adult population. And something too to think about is getting creative in thinking about what it might be that we could represent. For instance, there is a series of children's books that have been put out and thought of having a pro-aging point of view, and that's something that could be one way of growing the collections. As I mentioned before, sort of thinking about the different intersections of populations could be another. Participate in these entities that we have, like the CERT action group, and we are always looking for more people to be involved. We have so many wonderful leaders, most of whom you've heard from today, as well as some other folks, and we are always needing more help to make it easier for all communities to best serve older adults. Programming, programming, programming. That's something that Alan talks about a lot. There's so many opportunities there around aging, and that's going to be a focus more of our work too moving forward. And also, state library conferences and associations are very important in doing this work. So to that end, we currently are needing or seeking co-chairs in these three committees that we have. Um, the chairs we have are doing a phenomenal job, but we would like to give them some help in that way. And the whole point of this work is we don't want anyone to have to do too much. If everyone does a little, we can make a big difference without anyone get feeling burnt out, which is very important to us. So, if you have just a few hours to spare every month, we would love to have your continued involvement. And that is the conclusion of the presentation. If you've not already filled out um, our interest form so that we just keep you on our email list. Encourage you to do that. You can find that there. You also can email us and feel free to check out our website. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that we have a chance to have a conversation amongst ourselves without having to worry about it being communicated out of this group. So thank you all so much for attending. And for those who are maybe viewing this later, please feel free to get in touch with us. Consider taking that survey we showed before. And thank you for all the work you're already doing to serve older adults in your entire populations in your communities. Thank you.